This presentation is on the portrayal of mental illness throughout the history of Indian cinema, specifically the Hindi film industry Bollywood. The first Hindi film, Raja Harishchandra, was created in 1913. However, few films were made until the 1930s, when the first film with color and the first film with sound were released. Since then, the Hindi film industry has grown tremendously and has become known globally. Until the past 2 decades, mental illness has not been a very popular subject in Hindi films. It has been mostly avoided and often mistakenly portrayed or exaggerated. This analysis focuses on how mental illness portrayal has changed with the changing trends per decade. I have started with the 1960s because it is difficult to find films with portrayals of mental illness before then. The 1960s was just 2 decades after India had gained independence, so the Indian society was still unstable. Many of the films in the decades following independence were filled with hope for the future, often portrayed through love and happy endings. The 1950s and 60s tried to stay away from a realistic portrayal of the turbulent society and instead created escapist dramas to help people escape from the problems they were facing in their daily lives. This also shaped the portrayal of mental illness on screen during those decades. The first film that I am analyzing is the 1967 film Raat Aur Din, starring Nargis as Varuna, a woman with dissociative identity disorder. She has 2 personalities, one during the day and one that emerges in the night, hence the title Raat, which means night, and Din, which means day. In this film, Varuna becomes mentally ill due to trauma faced when her mother died from falling off a cliff. Varuna believes it was her fault because her mother was angry at her when she slipped off the cliff, and therefore Varuna developed this mental disorder. The portrayal of dissociative identity disorder in this film is quite accurate, because dissociative identity disorder is defined by a person with 2 or more personalities. Nargis does a fantastic job of portraying the 2 contrasting personalities, and the treatment by psychoanalysis is also quite realistic for the time period. The one thing in the film that is not accurate is the fact that one personality is in the day and the other at night. Normally, a person with this disorder will frequently change during the day itself, and there will not be a set time when they are a certain personality. The next film from the 60s is the 1969 film Khamoshi. This film is about a nurse in a mental hospital who falls in love with Arun, a patient with acute mania. Arun displays many characteristics of this disorder, such as unpredictable violent behavior and extreme mood swings. However, the main flaw in the portrayal of acute mania in this film is the treatment. Arun is cured because of the love between him and the nurse and psychoanalysis, when in reality, acute mania can only be treated with drugs. The next decade, the 1970s, is one of the most successful decades of Indian film. However, it is the one decade with the fewest accurate films on mental illness. The only film with mental illness as a substantial part of the plot was the 1970 film Khilona. In this film, Chand, a courtesan, is asked to marry Vijay, a mentally ill man, in order to treat him and help him recover. There was no specific mental illness mentioned, but his condition was a mix of multiple illnesses. He had symptoms of PTSD, such as fear of heights and fire due to a traumatic incident in which his lover died. He also behaved in a crazy manner, like a child, which is a symptom that cannot be prescribed to a specific mental illness. The flaw in this film, similar to Khamoshi, is that the cure is the love he receives from Chand after she marries him, and the recovery is immediate rather than gradual. This was an example of the continuation of the themes of hope and stability from the 60s. However, later in the 70s, the theme in films shifted to the rebellious hero who was willing to take the law into his hands. Therefore, films began to include psychopathic villains with no remorse or guilt, in order to make the hero's struggles even more dramatic and justified. One prime example of this is Gabbar Singh from Sholay, who is not remorseful while even killing a little boy purely out of revenge. The 1980s continued this trend of psychopath villains, but also had a few very sophisticated portrayals of mental illness. The first was the 1982 film Arth. Arth was about Inder, a man who had an extramarital affair with Kavita, a film actress. This was based off the real life of Mahesh Bhatt, the director of this film, and his affair with Parveen Babi, who is rumored to have schizophrenia. In the film, Kavita has delusions that Inder is returning to his wife every time he leaves the house, even if he's going for work. She also behaves in a very disorganized and impulsive manner. The second film is the 1984 film Sharabi, which portrays alcohol use disorder. The main character, Vicky, is a Sharabi, which is literally translated to alcoholic. Vicky is seen excessively drinking in many scenes of this film, even though it is not an integral part of the storyline. The 1990s was the transition from psychopathic villains to psychotic villains. The 90s villains were people who were disconnected from reality. In many instances, they were lovers who believed that their love was the most powerful and used that as an excuse to kill. Two examples of this are the films Dar and Gupt, in which the villains hurt and kill people who try to come in between them and their love. One film from the 90s that had mental illness as an important part of the plot was Fir Teri Kahani Yaad Aayi, which was about a schizophrenic patient and her difficulties in relationships. She had trouble maintaining relationships due to the mental instability and paranoia that occurred from schizophrenia. Starting in the 2000s, the films about mental illness increased in frequency and sophistication. The portrayal became less exaggerated and a more substantial part of the plot. The first film is the 2003 film Koi Mil Gaya about Rohit, a mentally disabled man who befriends an alien. In the film, Rohit has an IQ below 70 and has a low mental age, which is why he is in school with kids much younger than him in age. This disability occurred due to an accident that his mother was involved in before his birth, which resulted in a head injury.
He deserves to be amongst you. He deserves to be educated like you. He deserves to be blessed with an adult mind like you all.
The only unrealistic part of this portrayal is that he is cured by the alien giving him powers. The second film from this decade is the 2005 film 15 Park Avenue. This film was the first movie that was purely about the mental illness and its effects on relationships. Before this, all films had mental illness as a supporting element, but this film has it as its central plot. In this film, Mitali suffers from schizophrenia. She had traits throughout her childhood, but this was exacerbated due to a traumatic incident in her 20s, which caused her to withdraw from society. She began to have extreme delusions that she was married to her ex-fiancé and lived with him and their 5 children at 15 Park Avenue. The third film that portrays mental illness is the 2007 film Tare Zameen Par, about a young boy with dyslexia who has difficulty because no one understands the severity of his illness. The only person who understands is an art teacher he meets at boarding school that tries to sensitize his parents and other teachers towards the disease. In the film, Ishan, the young boy, has difficulty reading and spelling and displays many symptoms of dyslexia. In fact, the film even has a scene where the art teacher explains dyslexia in a very detailed manner to the parents, who are unaware and ignorant of the issue.
ये कैसे पढ़ सकता हूँ मैं? ये तो चाइनीज में।
अरे कोशिश तो कीजिए, चलिए ध्यान दीजिए।
क्या बेकार की बात कर रहे हैं? मैं कैसे पढ़ सकता हूँ इसको?
आप बदतमीजी कर रहे हैं। आपका रवैया ठीक नहीं है।
ये
आप शैतानी कर रहे हैं। कुछ ऐसी ही कैफियत होती होगी ईशान की। अक्षर ही समझ में नहीं आते होंगे। इस पढ़ने लिखने की तकलीफ को डिसलेक्सिया कहते हैं।
The 2010s had even more films on mental illness. 2011 saw the release of My Name is Khan and Karthik Calling Karthik. My Name is Khan was about a Muslim man with Asperger's syndrome who struggles to fight racism in the United States after 9/11. Shah Rukh Khan very accurately portrayed the disease with symptoms such as fidgeting, impulsive behavior, and intense limited interests. He even had a literal interpretation of language. When his wife tells him not to return home until he meets the United States president, he takes it literally and actually goes to meet the president, forming the main plot of the film.
मैं वापस कब आऊँ मंदिरा?
The second film, Karthik Calling Karthik, is about a man who receives calls from himself, giving him advice. Even though in the film he is diagnosed by the doctor as having schizophrenia, he in fact has dissociative identity disorder. He has an alter ego which wakes up and leaves himself messages. The only symptoms of schizophrenia he has are the fake memories he has created of a fake brother that died when he was young. The third film from this decade is the 2012 film Barfi, which featured an autistic character Chilmil. She displays symptoms such as difficulty in communication and repetitive behaviors. She is also socially impaired. Finally, 2016 had 2 instances of mental illness in film. The first is Dear Zindagi, which was Bollywood's first attempt at portraying depression. The film was praised for its accurate portrayal as it showed how normal people living a happy life can be depressed on the inside. The second film was Pink, which is the first Hindi film portraying bipolar disorder. The character in this film has extreme mood swings and often loses focus in daily activities, impairing his abilities to work as a lawyer. In conclusion, Hindi films have definitely increased in sophisticated portrayals of mental illness in the past 2 decades, and hopefully it will continue to do so in the future.